Hi, everyone. I want to tell you the story of a miracle, which also happens to be the story of how I fell in love with philosophy. And since it's often the case that miracles have inconspicuous beginnings, that is, the experiences that transform our lives the most profoundly, this story starts out in what might be the lamest way possible, with a breakup and a Google search. In my junior year of high school, my boyfriend had left for college, leaving me behind in the nothing town of Annandale, New Jersey, with one failed driving test behind me and a lot of very long afternoons ahead, which I was absolutely not going to spend doing any of the assigned reading for my English class. Still, there's only so much time that you can spend traipsing around in the field behind the graveyard. So at some point, I Googled, what are the best books to read? And for reasons that are to this day mysterious to me, decided to start with a book called Plato's Republic. Now, if you've ever talked to me for 5 minutes, you have probably heard me talk about Plato and his mentor, Socrates. And in fact, if you've been in class with me before, you have probably read some Plato. Research and Writing, do you remember The Cave? Yeah, that's in the Republic. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about these people, and then I'm going to tell you how they changed my life. Socrates was an ancient Greek philosopher who was notorious in his own time for strolling around the city of Athens barefoot, grilling acquaintances about their deeply held, though usually not deeply considered values, and about such light topics as the ultimate nature of the ultimate reality, stuff like that. So although he never referred to himself as a teacher, he never charged tuition, he never wrote anything down, he attracted a number of followers, and as I'll discuss in a little bit, some powerful enemies as well. Plato was a member of the younger generation, and legend has it that Plato had wanted to be a playwright. He wanted to be a poet, but on the day when he met Socrates, he ran home and immediately lit all of his plays on fire so that he could devote himself fully to philosophy, which he did. He went on to found a school called the Academy and to write a series of works called the Dialogues, which I think you should read. If you are ambitious, the Republic is an excellent place to start. I, however, was not ambitious. I think that my greatest academic achievement up until this point was getting an F in gym, which is actually pretty hard to pull off, but be that as it may, nobody expected me to start waking up at 4 in the morning so that I could start reading ancient philosophy before school. But I did. Why? Well, Socrates is perhaps most famous for asking questions with this basic structure. What is X? We all think that certain things happen to be true, but Socrates would ask, what is truth? With a capital T. Or we all think that certain things or people happen to be beautiful, but Socrates would ask, what is beauty? And I hadn't known that you could ask questions like this. And without coming to any clear answers, I still haven't, by the way, just asking these questions seemed to crack the boring world open and return it to me newly enchanted. And all of a sudden, I began to weep, tears of joy and confusion at the sight of ordinary things. The faces of strangers in a Walmart, wildflowers on the side of the highway, individual blades of grass. I started to ask myself, why is it that we get to have a sense of beauty at all? It, for the first time, struck me as gratuitous, a miracle. And For the first time, I began to live as though I were not some minor creature, as though my life were not trivial. Because suddenly, miraculously, it wasn't. So I kept reading Plato. And as I read, it became clear that Plato actually had a lot to say about what was going on with me. And that some of this is baked into the very word, philosophy, which in ancient Greek means love of wisdom. So philosophy then, properly understood, is not something that one can do on the side of a life otherwise devoted to the pursuit of wealth, glory, and entertainment. Plato instead describes philosophy, falling in love with wisdom, as though it were falling in love with a person. How the heart aches, how the judgment clouds, and how everything that is not this beloved comes to seem like a distraction from something very, very important. Philosophy means training the soul to sting with longing, that's a quote, to sting with longing for truth, beauty, and goodness. But because we're mortal, we can only ever glimpse these things imperfectly and occasionally, at best. For Socrates and for Plato, then, the best life for a human being is one in which we are perpetually maddened with desire for these luminous objects that remain perpetually out of reach. Certainly, this is a counterintuitive idea of happiness. If we want the right things, then by necessity, we want what we can't have. And Plato writes, furthermore, in the Republic, somewhat scandalously, that the one who truly longs for the good, even without possessing it, will always be happier than a more prosperous person who doesn't, even when all other worldly goods are stripped away. And I think that this idea would seem ridiculous if Socrates himself had not lived in this way. Eventually, he was arrested on the charge of corrupting the youth. And it was in the trial for his life when Socrates spoke his most famous words, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And as a former youth who was thoroughly corrupted by Socrates, I have some ideas about what this might mean. When Socrates says that the unexamined life is not worth living, the implication is that you've got to think with your whole life. Because if you are in the habit of at least trying to love the true, the beautiful, and the good, that means that you need to follow those things wherever they take you, and without knowing in advance where that might be. And that means that philosophy is dangerous. For example, if you study philosophy, you might move across the country to a city where you don't know anybody so that you can read ancient Greek all day, every day, for 3 years, bringing only a carry-on bag full of platform shoes and dictionaries. Just a hypothetical. Or if you study philosophy, you might do something even crazier than that, like becoming a high school English teacher. And having done both of those things, I can confirm philosophy is definitely dangerous. It was a lot more dangerous for Socrates, though. Eventually, he was condemned by the jury to execution. And while he had plenty of rich friends who begged him to let them bribe the guards and smuggle him out of jail into exile, he refused. And what's really remarkable is that even under the threat of death, even in prison, and even on the last day of his life, up until the moment when he took the poison that would kill him, Socrates chose to go on talking with friends about the things that really matter. And more importantly, he chose it joyfully. Certainly, this was an act of courage, but it was also an act of love. If we want to then follow the example of Socrates in our own, hopefully much less dramatic lives, then we've got to ask ourselves daily and with searing honesty, what do we love? What do we love? Have we trained our hearts on pursuits that can bring joy in the depths of suffering? Or do we live, as T.S. Eliot puts it, distracted from distraction by distraction? I know that for me, it's usually the latter. And now is a good time to confess to all of you that when it comes to loving wisdom, I myself have failed at pretty much every turn. Years of studying philosophy has not cured me of my vanity or my laziness or the habitual cowardice that leads me almost always to choose what is convenient over what is good. But nevertheless, I am convinced that my life is immeasurably better than it would have been had I not read Plato. After all, now I get to spend most of my time talking about the things that really matter with all of you. So, when, not if, but when you decide that you want to read some Plato, I hope that you'll come and see me. I really can't wait to hear what you think. Thank you.